Hello, this is Rick Tobin from Premier Hotel Realty, and I'm doing an interview today with attorney Tod Weston. Tod is from the Fort Lauderdale area. His office is there. He's been in practice about 30 plus years and also owns a title company. So we're going to talk a little bit about the current environment for closing deals, commercial deals, and what's going on with seller financing options. We're going to give you some tips and things to consider for that. Hello, Tod.
Hi, good afternoon, Rick. Doing well. Thank you.
Hey, Tod. We're in some crazy times right now. Can you tell us a little bit about what you see going on in the current market?
So more so than anything, people being concerned about the issues out there as far as health and safety and whatnot, we're starting to take a lot of precautions. We've been doing remote closings. We've been doing, we call them drive-bys or drive-throughs, very protective. But what's been happening is because of the concerns in what's happening with result of the market, there are some lenders pulling back. Sellers and buyers are getting concerned how they're going to be able to afford the transaction. So we've been taking different steps and educating the buyers and the sellers as to alternatives to be able to accomplish the purchase and continue moving on. Because as much as it's a concern, we still are going to be here tomorrow and continuing in business. So we want to be able to continue, with the economic process and so forth.
So in this lending environment, what we had talked about is the seller financing option for buyers and sellers and how that can make things go a lot smoother. But at the same time, there are a lot of considerations that each party needs to take into account and keep in mind. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've seen in your experience and what your thoughts are on that?
Well, most of the time, what happens with the lending, they're having requirements that are, of course, to be protective of the bank and the buyer, but they can loosen those restrictions if the seller is financing. And some of those particulars is that your job, of course, is going to be give valuation to that property. So an appraisal, for instance, isn't so necessary when you have the value of the property. You have other comparisons that you can do. So you do not have the cost of the appraisal, which, of course, takes time and usually slows the transaction down anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks. And then you also have inspections. And a lot of inspections, of course, one of them is the 40-year inspection, which just makes sure structurally and electrically it's sound. And most buyers, most sellers actually know what their business and what their building is. So therefore, they can pass that information on to that buyer. And then so their inspections are a little less and not so intrusive. One in particular is the environmental inspection. Most of the time, you have a building that may be completely clear of any petroleum products and so forth, or any dry cleaning and acidics and whatnot. So as a result, that inspection could be the use of a phase one, which is environmental inspection, that was done by the previous, the owner, and it avoids having to go through those steps and longer time periods. So there's a lot less. So from an inspection standpoint, it can streamline it. And then, of course, you can take a look at the terms. And in a commercial transaction, unlike a residential, it's a lot more up to the parties to determine what they want to do. They're not governed to the same extent of what restrictive measures are put in to, say, protect a buyer, when a buyer and seller now from a commercial setting can do what they want to do and what best works for them. So you can have all sorts of openness to be able to negotiate. And a lot of that is, of course, you've got the interest rate, you've got the payment plan, you can do balloon payments, you can decide whether or not you're paying your taxes monthly or in lump sums when maybe the cash flow is stronger. And you could do protective measures to the seller, such as personal guarantees and maybe additional collateral. But there's so much more openness and opportunity from a seller finance. Plus, you don't have the tax implications of the capital gain if structured properly.
Okay, you mentioned credit and collateral. Can you talk a little bit more about what you're seeing or some considerations people should keep in mind as far as collateral or who's signing or how properties are owned?
Yeah, by all means. One is of course you've got to take a look at how the entity or the individual is going to take title and who that is going to be, and that's wide open when it comes to commercial setting. In a residential, you'd have to put it in the individual's name most of the time. Here, you can put it in LLC, an Inc., a trust, anything you want to, because it's entirely up to the parties to determine that. So let's presume that the seller says, okay, you can buy it in an LLC, but because your LLC is newly formed for this particular transaction, we'll need a personal guarantee from you and potentially a spouse. And if the collateral of the building, let's presume that it's $1 million building and they're putting down $100,000, which is not much. It's only 10%. So it's a $900,000 or 90% loan to value. That's a little higher risk for a seller. So the seller may say, you can buy my building, but you may have a house, you may have some other buildings, and we'll use that as collateral or some stock pledges and things that would protect the seller, so the seller feels entirely comfortable knowing that this new buyer owning the property is able to afford and will be held to that standard of paying because they have enough collateral and comfort level. So we take a look at a lot of where the buyer is coming from. Usually, we'll maybe do a credit report or search on the buyer, but most of it has the financial strength. And then, of course, if this is a building that has tenants, you look at the leases, and you know that the leases have been long-term, or a tenant that's been paying, that rent roll and those leases are the strength of what the transaction is about. And that, of course, working out the cap rate, which, of course, is the amount of profit in a sense versus the cost, is that buyer will have an opportunity to determine, yes, I can afford this, and the seller is going to feel very comfortable with knowing that the buyer can afford it.
Great. So of course we can't get into all the details, and there are tons of details and considerations. But one other thing you and I had talked about is the escrows for insurance or taxes. How do you see that? What kind of considerations should people take in that respect?
So depending on if you're the buyer or the seller, escrows can be important and may not be. For a budgeting standpoint, I always like to see an escrow setup. So if your taxes, and I'm going to make a figure up to say, $12,000 a year, you have $1,000 a month, that would be enough to put aside in a year's time for the taxes. However, some businesses have a cash flow or a good season where the money's coming in at a particular time when it may not. Particularly a restaurant business during the tourist season, you'll have a lump sum and you'll be able to better afford those taxes. So from a seller standpoint, you may feel more comfortable knowing I'm getting it all paid at that time of year, or I feel more comfortable knowing that I'm going to put monies aside. And of course, from, the income from each month. If a seller feels that they want even more protection for themselves, they would start taking the monies themselves and saying, well, what if that buyer didn't have the money to pay the taxes or renew the insurances? I can take a portion of those rents each month. So if you're a seller, you'll put a little bit more aside. If you're a buyer, you decide, do I want those monthly escrows, for insurance or taxes, or do I want to be able to do a lump sum? And those are part of the negotiation between the buyer and seller. And also, each case by case is going to make a difference. It's not just it works all for all. You have to take a look at each transaction separately and determine from the parties what really works for them. And that's really I think the good part about seller financing is that the parties can make up their own terms that are comfortable for their purchase and sale. It's not where they're dictated by a bank that says you must do the following for it to work for us. This makes it so there's so many different alternatives and so many different opportunities to be able to go through and determine what really works well for me. And that could be from the interest rate, could be the payment, it could be a balloon payment. Maybe the buyer is coming into a lump sum of money and be able to pay it down. Or there may be a time of year where they do have extra money and want to put an extra, and I'm just going to say $10,000 down each season, which is something that most conventional institutional lenders do not really like to work with.
Okay, a lot of considerations. I'll add one more that we see, and of course my business is a lot of cash buyers, often from overseas, often out of the country. Sometimes we do owner financing for convenience sakes usually, but in our situation, a lot of these issues are overcome by a big down payment. So with enough equity on the buy side, that protects the sellers against a lot of these potential pitfalls.
And one thing you have to look at is that American investments are great for foreign nationals. Through an E2 or an E5 visa, there's certain monies that you can put in, and it gives them a great opportunity to get their green card, working towards their visas and so forth for the investment. So it's a great investment opportunity for foreign nationals. From a seller side, there's a 1031 tax exchange, which is where you can save particular taxes by calling it an exchange for the future to buy another. You defer your capital gains. And that's for a whole nother subject, because there's so many different points to a commercial transaction that need to know that it's not something we can just do in just a couple minutes of time talking. But that's why you always say reach out to a very experienced real estate broker and commercial like yourself, Rick, to be able to best understand what the best investment strategies are, or the exit strategy to roll into something else as well.
Sure, and as we say, don't consider this as legal advice, because everybody's situation is going to be a little bit different. But if somebody wants to talk to you about these items or their particular situation, how would they get in touch with you, Tod?
Well, they can always call me. I'm very accessible, always have been over the years. That's a reputation I have, to be someone you can reach out to. And my local phone number, I have offices, and our main offices in Fort Lauderdale. I have it in Boca Raton as well as Kendall and Miami, Florida. But our main office number is 954-772-4100. And you can also reach me on my emails at tweston, which at todwestonlaw.com, TWESTON at TODWESTON
Excellent. And I'm, again, Rick Tobin with Premier Hotel Realty. I'm Rick at premierhotelrealty.com, and you can reach me at the office at 954-543-5411, extension 2. And look forward to hearing from you. May you be safe and healthy, everybody, and make a lot of money in real estate. Thanks, Tod.
Thank you, Rick.